本当？見えないでしょ？どこにいるのかな？見えないよ。
Hey everyone, welcome to Waypoint Radio episode. I have no idea, Cado. What number are we at? Like, how did you title the holiday stuff? We're 255. No, what?
That's 532.
What? 250. 532. Wow, we're close to the website, right? 537. What is it?
Is that what it is?
538. It's 538.
538. Wow.
Yeah.
Screw that guy. Yeah, we're gonna. Yeah, is everyone ready for our Nate Silver retrospective podcast? We're gonna spend. I am your host, Patrick Klubbeck. I am joined by two of my co-hosts. Rob Zachney is out, at least for this recording, recovering. As you can tell, like if you've been following on Twitter, Rob's been watching a lot of films and tweeting about COVID as they have been recovering from it. Rob is on the mend. I can report Rob is feeling better, but as is the nature for a lot of folks that have experienced COVID, that can be kind of an up and down process. Ren, we watched you go through that in real time just before the holidays. Like, I think I'm okay. I'm not okay. And so our prayers up for Rob. We got you, dog. Like, we're here doing the podcast for you. And I'm going to get through it with producer Ricardo Contreras. Hello.
Hello.
And other
Welcome
producer,
back.
Renata Price.
I think that they should elect me the Speaker of the House.
So Ren has predicted, I don't know, are you predicting or...
hoping.
Does Ren
Just hoping.
think, what are the chances that someone will die on the floor of the House before Kevin McCarthy takes his 15th L?
I'm hoping.
You looked this up, right? There is actually, so we are recording this in
before,
between the 7th and 8th vote, right? Is that what's happening? Or are we 8 and 9?
No, we are 8 and 9. They're about to start number 9.
So we're just marking where we do this in the process. But you had a very interesting factoid that you tweeted about.
Oh yeah, so this is in part this was a kind of a tag team from a friend of Cado and I's Vogon on Twitter. What is Vogon's at? Regardless, the last time this happened, it was the direct antecedent to the Civil War and took 133 votes.
Holy shit!
What do we know? What span of time?
2 months. Yeah. 2 months.
2 months.
It was.
I think we would, if given 2 months of voting, I think we'd blow well past.
Yeah, it was
200.
December 3rd, 1855 through February 2nd, 1850. Sorry. Yeah. 2 months. December 3rd through February 2nd. And the last time it happened was a direct antecedent to the Civil War. No one died on the floor during that time period. There was no members of Congress, but just some fun facts for you. You know all the former members of Congress who didn't get reelected? So they're not allowed to start their new jobs because they are still technically members of Congress because their replacements have yet to be
Oh, so you can't be like a lobbyist or whatever.
There were guys who
you're
were
just in stasis.
There were guys who were supposed to start their jobs today and have been stopped from starting their jobs because of it. It is honestly the funniest possible outcome. The funniest possible situation.
That is incredible. Yeah. We'll do some real-time updates on potential deaths of Congress people due to exhaustion over failed votes.
Who is the oldest member of the House?
Oh my God. All right. Well, we are recording this after many, at least I hope, Rob clearly, tweeting his thoughts about Black Adam. But did everyone else have a decent? I have a question. So we had a holiday, varying degrees of how long that was for everyone else, but we at least had like a pretty decent period where everyone got some time away from work. I have like a deep strategy when it comes to the vacation. Like I imagine some people go into it like arms wide open, what comes, what may, I will, the time off will take me where it goes. Obviously, holidays complicate that, where you're brought into various family or friend obligations. But outside of that, I'm curious, like, what is the holiday strategy? Does Cado go in with a list? Like, hey, this is what we're doing on this holiday. These are the things I want to watch, or I got this lit. What happens when the clock strikes? No more pod recordings.
Yeah, I mean, there's like a list, a very loose list of like shit I would love to do, and then it's always like not hug. No,
did you accomplish any of them?
No, none of them.
What were some of them on the list? What hit me? What did we
read a book that I've been trying to read for like 4 years?
Like a specific book, not just a book. Like you could have lowered the bar to just
a different book,
short story.
No, literally been trying, not 4 years. Like I think it's been 2 years since I've owned a physical copy of a memory called Empire, and I started reading it. I've gotten like a quarter of the way through. And I could just never find
qualify
time.
That you can keep reading it from the spot that you stopped if you have been doing it for 2 years?
I think I can.
Ren, I feel like you read more than probably any of us. I just get that impression. Is Cado allowed? Do the rules state when Cado is forced to start the book over?
I think
I never start a book over. I will. Wow. I can.
Do you take a several year break?
I could. I've taken several month breaks.
But you don't.
I've taken several month breaks before, and then continued.
I think several months is totally like you started something in the summer, got busy. Months, years.
Oh, to be clear,
different periods of time.
This wasn't like a single burst of reading that has gotten me through a quarter of the book. I have read over the past 2 years a quarter of that book. Slowly,
like chapters, or are you starting mid-chapter and like, that's it for tonight?
Yeah, if it depends on. Sometimes there's like those mid-chapter breaks where you're like, this could have been a chapter, but they didn't want to break it up into a new number. I get to that, and I'm like, okay, I can put a bookmark here and go to sleep. So then it'll be like, next time I'll read 3 pages. I just my family. So I. Grew up in a household of 6. You know, I have 4.
You also traveled, right?
I have 4 siblings. Yeah, I go down to Florida every year to visit them. I have 3 siblings and two parents. So the 6 of us are very rarely in the house anymore because the youngest of us, I'm the oldest. The youngest of us just graduated college. So like everyone's out of the house at this point. So as time has gone on, it's been rarer and rarer to have all 6 of us there, which means my mom is like, we're doing everything together, everything all the time. I'm going to the grocery store to pick up a watermelon. Everybody get in the van. We're all going now. It's just like, Jesus. I get nothing done because I'm just literally being dragged around to do errands.
I'm trying to read this book.
I would like to sit and just not think about anything for like 24 hours. But it's very go, go, go in Florida, which is why I only stay for a week. And then I came back to New York and also continued to not do anything because this year I had friends visiting from a friend from LA decided to spend New Year's in New York instead. So I was like, well, time to be an entertainer for another week. So nothing of like, I was going to play so many games. I was going to read. I was going to start my game of the year twine a lot earlier than I normally do. I did.
Bren, what did you have a holiday strategy?
I don't have a plan. I don't have a strat.
So
I kind of I follow my heart. Okay.
Where did your heart take you?
My heart took me. So I read so I had 2 14-hour train rides, or a 14-hour train ride and then a 12-hour train ride.
Oh, so you were traveling back to OH. I would assume.
Yeah, and I think that, Ohio's kind of similar to Florida, and my experience in Ohio is similar to Florida in that it was either go, 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 or absolutely nothing. And the cool thing about Ohio is that it's kind of like, it kind of vacuums all of the joy and life force out of you the moment you cross the state lines. Have you thought about
piling everyone into a van and buying watermelons, though?
Yeah,
I'm starting to think maybe this is should not be a Cado family tradition, but it's just something we should all adopt as
that sounds lovely.
Yeah.
Not
everyone pick out a different watermelon and bring it home. what are we gonna do with these watermelons? We're not sure, but we'll look on YouTube.
Well, you've heard of jack-o'-lanterns. Here's water.
No, Cado.
Juices out of the watermelon while you're cutting into it.
No, you
sucking
scoop it out. You scoop it out. Make delicious watermelon agua fresca.
Everyone loves dried watermelon rinds.
Yeah.
That's one thing I know is when those get real hot and spicy, everyone's having a good time from the candle flame. I read all of Jeff Vandermeer's novel Born on the way up, which was really good.
Okay, if you don't have a holiday strategy,
yes,
you sound like someone that might have a train strategy.
Yes.
Have you like thought through, this is what I want to do like in these 14 hours?
Generally, I will go in with something. So I did, on the way up, I started Chained Echoes. I read all of Born because I got burnt out on Chained Echoes, and listened to the Shrieking Shack, which is a podcast.
The Fuck Harry Potter podcast.
Yes. And so, yeah, that was.
Do you want to feel morally correct? Like, you want to listen to people talk about Harry Potter, but you also want them to rip it apart at the same time. Like, how do I accomplish both these tasks? I've heard nothing but good things about that particular podcast.
Shout out ZC. And so on the way back, though, I was like, I'm gonna get stuff done because I received code for something we're gonna be talking about a little bit later in the pod, and that was a lot of my holiday was just devouring that like a yummy meal, and then starting my review on the train ride back, and then finishing up like a different draft. So yes, that was my holiday.
I was given, there was a brief period where I thought to myself, so I had I had 2 weeks off. I had extra vacation I had to burn because I'm bad about using all of it. And 2023, we say it constantly on the show, fuck capitalism, go home. But I stay at home and I don't fuck capitalism enough. But I need to take more days off.
Did you, wait, I think I learned. Did any of your days roll over this year? Do you have rolls
yes,
over?
But that's but that's the problem is I don't take enough to like.
Apparently, the ones that roll over, I don't know if this is just
until March,
year.
right?
March.
Yeah.
I didn't know March was the cutoff. I definitely lost vacation days last time because I didn't know that.
I'm losing them anyway. Like, but I need to get better about this. Like, I should take my whole like kids spring break off. Like, I should just do that, even if my like. So anyway, that's all to say. I had a week where my kids were still in daycare, and my wife was like, "What are you gonna do?" I was like, "What do you mean? What am I gonna do?" I was like, "You like do something special with the kids because you got time off?" And I was like, "No, I'm not. I'm gonna stay at home, and Daddy is gonna watch movies." I turned my oldest was stuck in school and like school, and that's not the kind of thing where you just want to take them out willy nilly unless it's like really important,
right?
And then by the second week rolled around, a lot of holiday stuff, but. No, I did not like take my kids to the aquarium. That said, I was handed a to-do list by my wife of various things like, please go to the Honda dealership and spend 3 hours and $200 getting a new key fob. So I did that. Because once the computerization of computers or of cars or of everything really is cool or interesting until everything becomes proprietary and you just can't go to the Home Depot and get a $2 key because they claim, well, it's a $120 part and it's $80 to program. And I'm not trying to downplay the labor of the guy at the Honda dealership who put that together, but he just handed me a key with a tiny computer in it.
Is that
and I paid $220 for the opportunity.
How do those work? Can the Flipper Zero copy a key fob? This is my question.
I've looked at the Flipper Zero. That thing is neat.
Yeah, it is. I want one of those.
You can basically download RFID tags, right?
Right.
Yes.
This is what I'm saying. Is it an RFID? Like, can you Flipper Zero your key fob and never pay them again?
I didn't Google this enough, and you're gonna make me feel awfully distressed if I just took it at Honda's word that I had to come in and do it through them.
Never take it at a company's word that you have to do it through them. They're always lying.
Yeah. Well, please write in if there are ways to, in the future, when I lose another one of these keys, can I not pay $200 for it? Otherwise, I don't know, maybe this is slightly deranged. I'm not sure. But I do try to like run away from video games to a fair degree during my time off. That said, I still managed to. Well, we'll get to it, but there's a handful of games that I ended up finishing because I wanted to get through over that time because I personally wanted to finish them. But one of the few film podcasts I listen to is called the Filmcast. It used to be called the /Filmcast, and they divide their discussions into a like non-spoiler, like kind of like broad impressions, and then a spoiler section where they can just like talk fully about the story and the plot beats and the themes and stuff like that. And the movies that I like really want to see, I basically listen until the spoiler break, pause it, and I was like, cool, I'll listen to the rest of that when I watch the movie. And I wait till this period to just like I'm at a buffet, like Banshees of Inisherin. I think that's how you pronounce it. Like a bunch of those. So that's mostly what I did during my break was like also watch Black Adam and be like, this movie sucked. That said, it was funny when he Kool-Aid Man his way through the door like 25 times. That bit was always funny, even though I don't think they meant it to be funny. So I spent a lot of time watching movies. And I do really recommend watching Banshees of Inisherin. You want to feel for a donkey and also Colin Farrell's eyebrows. Like, please watch that film. It's extremely good. Two small pieces of game news. One, just kind of want to shout out that CES is happening this week. Part of that was Sony announcing that they have a new kind of accessibility controller called Project Leonardo, which is not necessarily a response, but it's sort of an extension of really a lot of the hard work that like Microsoft has been doing with their own accessibility controller. I have no sense at this moment because I don't think anyone's used it, how it compares to Microsoft's work on their own accessibility peripherals, but broadly, I think it is cool that another major hardware platform is saying, hey, we should spend real work and resources making it easier to play our games, while simultaneously raising the base price of our platform arbitrarily in select markets so that it's actually harder to buy it.
Oh, no.
Not a contradictory message there whatsoever. Who could say?
There also,
and then, yeah.
I forget if this, I'm trying... Maybe I shouldn't say. I'm trying to remember. I think I saw something about how there are PlayStation, like there are controllers that people use for PlayStation 4 that were accessibility like focused that could be supported by the PS5 but haven't been yet. So I'm curious.
I mean, stuff like that wouldn't shock me. Like
Yeah,
it is very normal for things to break compatibility between hardware changes.
Yeah, they're still waiting for like a lot of fighting game controllers to become compatible with the PS5. So like I would be completely unsurprised if Sony just completely busted those.
Right.
Yeah. Elsewhere, continuing the sort of expansion of unionization, discussions about unionization. We've got a piece up on the site. Fallout and Doom QA testers just formed the biggest union in the U.S. games industry. To quote from the piece from Emmanuel Myberg and Jules Roscoe. Quality assurance workers at Microsoft ZeniMax Studios, the people who make the Elder Scrolls, Fallout, and Doom games, just voted to form a union, making it the first game studio to unionize under Microsoft and the largest group of union-represented quality assurance testers at any U.S. game studio. ZeniMax Workers United and the Communication Workers of America didn't share the exact vote count, but said that the 300 QA testers overwhelmingly voted in favor of their union. Workers decided to join the union by signing union authorization cards or voting via an online portal. As the company had previously promised, Microsoft has recognized the union. And there's some previous reporting, if you click through that piece, in which they spoke to some of the workers who were part of the organizing effort. But this is another encouraging development for folks getting together in their workplaces, unionizing, organizing. It is all the shit we love to see. And I don't know, there's a whole lot to say about this, but it's just really encouraging. It's very exciting. Like I hope this continues to spread. I believe actually, I don't have this linked in here, but I believe there's also some other unionization efforts happening that are going to involve non-QA people as well.
Nice.
And so all of that is hopefully going to lead to yet another year of people feeling emboldened to take that kind of collective action that we are always rooting for here at Waypoint.
Hell yeah.
I know there were a lot of holiday games that I played, that other people played, but the game that you played the most, that we'll talk really in depth about next week. But at least wanted to get sort of your
Wait, would it be the 2 weeks from now? Yeah, and
2 weeks from
the
now.
review embargo is the 20th of January.
20th. But the preview impressions embargo is up for Fire Emblem Engage, the new Fire Emblem game coming to the Switch from is it still Intelligent Systems?
Yes,
or this is
still Intelligent Systems.
Nintendo. Ren, you said you played a lot of this on your train ride. You had a lot to say in your review when that embargo was up, but what do you make of the new Fire Emblem so far?
Well, what I make of it is that I put over 35 hours into it over the course of the holiday break, like well over. And I did that for a reason. And the reason is that
hopefully it is not because you were assigned the review.
No,
you would have done that anyway, but when you said
No. Also, it was over an extended enough period of time where it was like mostly fun.
Yeah, shouts to Nintendo for the code did come in extremely early, which is always nice for long games. But sorry, continue.
So, it is, if you liked Three Houses for its narrative, for the ways in which it asks questions of its characters, it builds relationships that, mean things and question systems and like have characters that grow and change over the course of the video game, you should not play Fire Emblem Engage.
Oh no, that's an enormous but, because that was going to be my first question is like, where does this game fit in the sort of design continuum of the personification of Fire Emblem that kind of started around the Awakening era?
Yes. So that's the thing, is that it removes romances. There are no romances in this game. The S rank of supports, which has been in pretty much every Fire Emblem game since Awakening, has been removed. There's
no S.
No S. It cap at A. There is a cap at A. The game goes CBA, and you're like, "Where's S?" It feels like there's a space for that there, and it doesn't get filled. Here's the thing. That feels tonally correct, because Fire Emblem Engage is a Saturday morning cartoon. The game's introductory, opening song is the most, Pokemon theme opening I have ever heard. It is honestly incredible. It is, roaring violins with a dude, fast singing to a specific da 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 like that, but singing out words, which is a very specific vibe. Reminds me of mid 2000s shows designed to sell toys to children. A Bakugan, a Digimon, a Pokemon, a Beyblade, and that tone kind of carries into the actual writing of the game, in which no characters actually have real opinions or motivations or beliefs. They're all kind of just cardboard cutouts of themed groups from the country they're from. So there's 4 main countries: Firene, Brodia, Solm, and Illusia. And each of them have a thing about them. Firene people love peace. Brodia people love combat and the honor that comes from combat, but also they're really broy and fun when they're not fighting. They're cool buddies who are super nice.
Bros, but not misogynistic.
Exactly.
Like a nice bro.
Exactly.
Okay.
Solm it has a matriarch and their people are free, which in this case means it's the very much
is that free? You put free in quotes.
Well, because it's a very particular vision of freedom, where it's freedom is
freedom is service of the state.
Right. Freedom is a prince being able to do whatever the fuck he wants. Right. We don't do noble customs. We're all about freedom here. And it's all right, bud, calm down. And then each, you have the royals and they're your main, crew, and they each have 2 retainers, and the retainers always have a theme that the cluster of characters is built around. So the Prince of Firene and his retainers, they all love working out. They are part of the peace country, but all of them love getting buff. But one of them's a girl, and she likes being pretty and getting buff. And then
Okay.
there's a dude who likes reading books and getting buff. And if you apply this basic theory of a character writing, now apply it across an entire video game with like 20 plus like characters, right? And so this is not a game that is asking interesting questions. There are not like political machinations happening. It is like action figures like bouncing off of each other.
Are you picking the factions this time?
No.
Or, okay, so it's more of just a straightforward.
Yes, this is a deeply linear game. There are no choices that I've experienced so far. I have not had to make a single choice in the video game. And so all of this is the but for me saying that this is some of the most fun I've had in a tactics game in a while.
Okay, so that was gonna be my question, because I remember playing Three Houses and enjoying. It was a long game. All these are longish games, but that game felt longer because I at a certain point just wished it was broadly just fully like this world's cool, the characters are cool. What if this was just like more of a visual novel, like a very ambitious, expensive visual novel? Because the tactics stuff on like the normal difficulty setting was producing zero friction whatsoever.
Right. By the end of that game, it's just like, do I have the higher level character? Yes. Done.
Yeah. Right. And I could have just automated it, and that would have been more engaging than actually moving the pieces forward. And so it's interesting in this game. That would not have been my assumption. My assumption would have been lean heavy in the direction of the fandom, sort of aspect of Fire Emblem that has become more popular over the last 10 years or so. And it's interesting that this one pulls that back and actually emphasizes. So I guess if that's true, why is it the tactics are more interesting this time?
So the other interesting thing about the fact that it's you would expect it to be deeply invested in the characters and everything, that is also the premise of the game. So the whole thing with Fire Emblem Engage is that the world it takes place in exists at the intersection of all of the other Fire Emblem worlds, and so there are these rings that contain the like ghostly versions of the protagonists from previous games. The first one you get is Marth. You get Marth's emblem ring, and you can summon Marth to
but
aid
it's not
you in
them.
battle.
It's not like
it is and it isn't. It's like a ghostly version of them. They remember
does the
all of
ghost
their
Marth
past.
bring back its experiences?
Yes.
And
Well, no.
like back to original Marth? Does
No.
Marth know what Ghost Marth has been up to?
He has no idea. And here's the thing: Ghost Marth.
The ethics of these rings are questionable at best.
Ghost Marth has one of the funniest introductions I've ever heard. So you get the ring for the first time. You put on the emblem ring. Your character says the phrase that awakens Emblem Marth, and he rises from his slumber from the ring. And Emblem Marth does like a cool transformation sequence. It is genuinely like Power Rangers-esque as he does a transformation sequence, and then looks dead at the camera and goes, "I am Marth. Beat. Emblem Marth, to be clear."
So wait, so they have separate agency. They're aware that they're a ghost.
Yes. And the delivery of "I am Marth, Emblem Marth, to be clear," completely changed my perspective on the game. Because to that point, I was like, this is awful. The writing is so bad. All of this sucks shit. What are they doing? And then I heard, "I am Marth, Emblem Marth, to be clear." And I was like, I love this. This is a game this is a child's story. And you know what? It's having fun with that. And so it is deeply invested in like obsessive about the history of the series. You're summoning all of these older characters from previous games to aid you in battle. And in doing so, it is also like the simplest narrative that I think the series has ever had. It feels like a real like pastiche of things, and is constantly like referencing stuff, and like it is an echo of everything that came before it. And I mean that in both positive and negative lights. Please, Cado.
I was just gonna ask how do you get people? Is this like a linear path?
They have this thing called a Pokeball, and you go out into the field. It's like, there's a Marth, and
Marth, get in this cool ring. Hey. Hey.
Marth's off with his family, and you're hiding behind a bush with this ring that just sucks his soul out. Got him.
So there are 12 emblem rings that actually summon a character, that have a person in them. And then the game also has a weird gacha mechanic where that is not, you can't put money into it. Let me just note that real quick.
Yeah.
There's no money you were putting into this. Where you get rings that don't give you the abilities that emblem rings give you. Because what emblem rings give you is when you equip a character with an emblem ring, they get the skills of the character whose ring it is.
Okay.
Which is really cool.
But just the skills and not the like stats and stuff?
They do get a stat boost. They get a stat boost and the character skills. But those skills are like meaningful. For example, Sigurd, one of the previous like key characters from one of the games. When you equip Sigurd's bond ring and activate it, the character gets a +5 movement range, which means that they can travel basically half a map pretty casually. They also gain the ability Momentum, which increases their damage of the first attack they do by 1 for every space they moved.
Ooh, nice.
And so suddenly you can get a 10 damage boost for free by just traveling across all of these spaces if you have this ring equipped.
Which,
and
like,
this is
10 is big in Fire Emblem numbers. Like,
yes.
Yeah.
And this is in addition to your character's signature skill. So like all Fire Emblem games, every character has a signature skill, and then they have a class skill. And so signature skills, class skills, and then your emblem skills of the equipped ring you have. And then there's 2 free slots, which you can take from rings that you have used previously. And so you can basically mix and match all of these abilities to create really specific builds for your characters. I have one character who has, I think all 4 of her slots are filled up and is just a nightmare. Just a complete and total nightmare on the battlefield, who gets like massive crit bonuses and is also really, really tanky. And so you have all of these like stacking skill bonuses. And so the build crafting aspect of the game is really cool and like way more in depth than anything else in the series.
Seems more dynamic too, where you have a lot of opportunity to really alter like some real specifics of what the character is going to do on the field.
Yes. The other thing that using these rings does is you can engage them. And when you engage them, you get a little transformation sequence and the person, looks different because they fuse with their emblem. And so when they do this, they don't just get access to a really powerful like super move, which they do. They get access to a super move. They also get access to the emblem's signature weapons, which means that if you have an axe character and you give them the Ring of Marth, who uses a sword, when you engage, that axe character can temporarily become a sword character.
Oh, so that you don't have the traditional sort of rock, paper, scissors that defines a lot of, or at least you can kind of subvert the rock, paper, scissors, where like a lot of times it's like, hey, you're like axe and sword, like, you're playing a lot of strengths and weaknesses in Fire Emblem games. And once in a while, they're like, then you can have instances where, well, this guy is weak as shit against this. Hopefully I can survive the fight. And this sounds like you actually have kind of an ace up your sleeve, or at least it gives you more options with where to place the unit. They won't necessarily completely screw them. Exactly.
And the other thing is about the triangle. I think that before this game, the weapon triangle was bad. Because the only thing that the weapon triangle did in previous games was increase or decrease your likelihood of hitting the enemy. And so and sometimes it would adjust damage slightly. And so if you use a sword against an axe, you're going to be slightly more likely to hit someone. Engage adds the break mechanic, where if you hit someone with an advantageous weapon, they lose their ability to counterattack.
Oh, shit.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's a pretty big change in terms of like the risk reward of attacking an enemy, which is like a lot of what you're doing on a Fire Emblem map.
Yes. And so standard Fire Emblem attack is you attack, enemy counterattacks, you attack again. If you use a break ability, if you break them, you just get to attack twice. And the next attack against them also avoids being countered. So they can't counter the next attack either. And so if you are, say, for example, you're fighting a character who's like wielding like a heavy armor character, right? And your sword character, you have someone with Armor Slayer, sword that breaks armor, right? And if they attack them directly, they will be killed in the counterattack before they get the chance to actually beat the enemy, right? And so instead, you send in a weaker character who can break the armor user first, and then the sword character with Armor Slayer can go in and finish them off without risking taking damage.
Nice.
Which is really cool because it opens up the solutions to problems, right? In a lot of Fire Emblem games, it is really, really rock, paper, scissory, right? The only way you're going to take out a flying unit is a bow, or the only way you should take out a flying unit is a bow. The only way you should take out an armor user is with magic or an armor-breaking weapon, right? And this game goes, you can do a lot more, right?
It feels like...
However... yeah, please.
I was just gonna say, it feels like you're gonna be engaging characters. Like before, it's like you would line up the bow user against the flyer, and they would only focus that and like not do anything else. But this feels like you can have someone set them up in order for anyone else to kind of follow through on it.
Yes, exactly. And like, it's super sick because they also in this game, priests, your healers, also used fist weapons. And fist weapons break
naturally
bows, knives, and tomes, which means that your priests are just as useful on the front lines as they are as healers, because they are the people who can open up magic and knife users to actually being taken out safely. Because magic and knives are really good in this game. And so you have to have priests who are willing to go in there and break them to set up their allies. And so you have to be constantly making the decision of, am I going to spend my priest's limited time healing an ally who is really low on health, or using them to break the enemy to set up, to continue this like forward advance. And so you're having decisions like that come up constantly, and they're really engaging. They also add like new weapon types, the great weapons, which are really slow, but they deal a lot of damage. And they also knock characters back on the map, which means that you can adjust the enemy's position, which is important because this game uses a lot of terrain effects. And so moving your enemies around is kind of essential in a lot of maps. And so what you do is you break an enemy and then you send in a great weapon user to knock them around so you can safely use those weapons without being killed, because great weapons take so long to swing that the enemy gets to counterattack you twice before you get to attack once most of the time. And that is enough to kill people in this game, because also the enemies hit hard. Like, that's the thing.
So yeah, I mean, that was going to be my question, is you've now played enough that in Three Houses, the game was broken for me. And was completely built on how much am I enjoying the characters at this point, like in the story. And I liked it quite a bit, but it was almost a chore to go back to the tactics layer. At this point, like how does that arc, that difficulty arc, feel for you in terms of how much the game is pushing back?
I started the game on hard difficulty. I am playing casual because I've come to a conclusion about myself. There is no point for me playing classic Fire Emblem difficulty, because all it led to me doing was restarting the second I lose any character.
Yep, same here.
That's not fun for me. Like, I realized that it was not doing anything for me, because if I'm going to restart anyways, and I want to see these character stories that much, at that point, it's not like, when characters die in Fire Emblem, the world doesn't react to that. You just miss out on their narrative. And I think that sucks. Like, if you're going to let those characters die, I want the world to push back on me. I want other characters to be like, oh, fuck, that guy died. And this is like changing me as a person. And this is really hard,
especially on your first playthrough, where like you're trying to see all that through.
And so I've been playing hard and casual. I have a pretty well-leveled party. Like, I'm like technically over-leveled for a lot of the story content. I am getting down to one or two troops left alive by the end of fights, because the game is really, really clever about the groups of enemies it pits you against. It is doing a really good job of being like, okay, we're going to make this squad that is going to be really difficult to fight through unless you fight them correctly and fight them really smart. And because the enemy can break you as much as you can break them, the weapon triangle really matters. In previous games, if you let someone get out of position and they were high enough leveled, you could be fine. You can send your sword user into a group of spear guys if your sword user's high enough level. They'll just chew through the spear users like they're nothing and counterattack them to death. If you do that in this game, you will be killed because you'll just get broken over and over again and overrun. So the enemies hit hard, they have access to the break system, and they are cleverly placed. Which is why the game's actually requiring you to use all of these abilities and use them well. And so, like, you are given powerful tools because you need them. And that is really fun for me because there's so many solutions to these problems, and I'm finding my own solutions to these problems, but the solutions are so rarely just be a higher level. Even my highest leveled characters who are, 7 levels over what the story content is, can still get killed if I put them in a bad position. And like that to me means that the game has done the right thing in terms of its balancing. I think that the break system is the addition that the series needed to actually feel meaningful. And like for folks who really like the original Fire Emblem tactics, like style of tactics, I don't know if they will get what they want out of this because it is such a different thing at times. The break system makes it feel like such a different thing. And, the Power Rangers analogy also holds true in that, like, your characters can be extremely powerful. And there is this element of the game wants you to lean into the joy of making a really cool guy do a bunch of shit and take out a bunch of enemies, while also making sure that if you don't play carefully, it will take that away from you in a heartbeat. And I think it's found actually a really good balance between those things.
Interesting.
Nice.
Well, I'm glad that is the response that you've had so far to Fire Emblem Engage. That sounds. I have to admit, I was deeply worried about what this game was after Three Houses, despite liking quite a bit about that from a story and world perspective. But even if it loses some of that, the combat layer stuff sounds way more fascinating than I was expecting. So rather than being, despite someone who's like played all the games since Awakening and kind of turned on to the franchise since then, part of my issue was the kind of like stagnant difficulty and mechanics of the last one. And this sounds like this addresses it in a big way.
I am really excited for whatever the next Fire Emblem game is because
it feels like a transition one where maybe you don't necessarily even blame them for the story being like, hey, we've got a really good story for the next Fire Emblem. Pocket that. We're doing a mechanical one. We do another one of these every 2 years. Kind of like, what Pokemon is going through. Yeah. It's like Nintendo produces them at such a rate that if this is the kind of off year where they're trying a couple of things and then that all gets deployed in a more refined way and inevitably the one that they're working on now, because this game was finished a while ago. Yeah. That's really interesting.
Well, the last thing I'll say is that, like, and why I'm so excited is that this game makes it very clear that they have learned how to meld their tone and narrative to their mechanics. And they've learned how to do it really well. The Saturday morning cartoon vibe is so well, like, conveyed through both things that, like, I want to see what it looks like when they're asking real questions. What do the mechanics look like when they are asking real questions and it's reflected in the fights? Because they have managed to do that with goofiness, and I want to see it with a Three Houses level story. And I think it'll be really, really cool to see the specific mechanics they are able to cook up if that is what they end up doing.
One game that it sounds like the two of you touched on over the holidays, a game that I have heard hooting and hollering from one Austin Walker and a lot of other folks, Jason Schreier, is Chained Echoes, a Chrono Trigger inspired JRPG that I believe was like largely made by one person in Germany. And I'm curious what the two of you have made of that game so far.
I'm still pretty early, but
what is pretty early? Because I've heard that game's like 45 hours.
very, very early, very super early.
Okay,
I played
all right,
like 2
okay.
hours. But like what's interesting is that it jumps straight into the like, I see where the what's it called, Chrono Trigger comparisons come in. But I'm curious about where it goes from there. It has a very interesting kind of base mechanic in all of the fights that feels very, they introduce early on that this fantasy world has mechs, and there's basically a heat management mechanic for your entire party, where there's a bar that when you do offensive like actions, it fills up and it gets into a
It's like ABT but bad.
well, like as you do things, it fills up and it gets to a certain point where there's like a little zone that's green, and if you go over that, if you keep doing things that make it go up, it gets bad. You hit the red zone and you're basically taking extra damage. So there are certain moves that will take it down, and what kinds of moves take it down change every like 3 or 4 turns. So there's a management of like, you want to stay in the hot zone, in the good zone, and not overextend yourself, but also and it feels very much attuned like in my brain it's like heat management on a mech, right? The more things you do, the more it'll go up, but then you have to vent at some point. But that works just for your whole party, even if you don't have I haven't actually played with a mech because you get blown out of it pretty early on.
And the cool thing about this system is that like it really encourages you to use abilities you would normally not use, right?
Like,
so like
blocking, like, hey, I can block in a
That's a big
JRPG. I'm never gonna do it. Why would I block? That's for cowards.
Yeah, no, that's a big
blocking
one.
reduces it, and also like the cool thing, it has variable difficulty, and so you can change how tight the window is. And so when I was
kind of like it changing like the parry system,
Yes.
sort of thing.
yes,
Oh,
you can
interesting.
change how large the overdrive window is.
Yeah, the space that you're good in is.
And that's the game's equivalent of like an easy, medium, like hard sort of like setting is broadly that, or is that something like a subsystem that you can mess
It's
with?
a couple. There's actually a couple difficulty sliders. One of them is enemy stats. One of them is the overdrive range. And I think there's a third one that I can't remember, but there's 3. And so when I turned those up, again, I'm barely scraping through fights in the same way that I was in Fire Emblem Engage at its best. I am barely scraping through some fights in Chained Echoes because it's like, you really have to be on the fucking ball in terms of keeping your heat management, because when you go into that overheating zone, not only do you take extra damage, but all of your abilities cost double the mana. And
interesting.
That eats up your resources so fast. And so there was a ton of times where I was in a fight and I was like, go, go, go. And then I would realize, oh, fuck, I'm getting near the end of overdrive and my next character doesn't have the kind of ability that I need to reduce the bar. And so I have to find some way to reduce this bar. So I guess I'll block or something. But even blocking, I'm pushing into the overheat range.
Oh,
And
so even blocking is not neutral. It is still considered a. So how does Cado, you had mentioned like the moves change. What is determining what is like a cooldown sort of move?
But so like basically there's like a little symbol next to the overdrive bar, and different types of skills have different symbols associated with them. I think the symbols mean like they kind of are attached to certain different types of either magic or other sorts of like special abilities. But basically like sometimes it'll be associated with an offensive move. Sometimes like a magic fireball will still pull you down, even though normally it would push you up on that bar. What's also really interesting is structurally, at least as far as I've played, which again, only a couple hours, but so far there is no, in JRPGs, you get potions, you get mana, like ether pots or whatever. You get resources to use that you use over time past many fights. Every time you fight in this game, everything resets. Like each next fight.
I hate those systems. I
But you still
hate
have-
how like gotta have 99 high potions.
You still have potions, but they're only for use within a fight. Like, right, you get hurt.
So it's like kind of like upgrading your flask in a Souls game.
Right.
Like, hey, you've got 6 here you can use.
Basically, it's like you're only using them during the fight, and then once the fight is over, like the next time you have a fight, everything's filled back up. So it's not like this over time sort of resource management. It's a per fight resource management situation where like you could use them all on one fight and then not have any for the next. And so it's over time in that way, but it's not like you have to heal after every single battle or whatever, right?
The other cool thing about that is that there are some items that act as whatever ability type will lower the gauge. And so you can have some like, oh, I have an item that is a buff replacement. And so if I'm on a character who doesn't have any buff abilities that would lower the heat gauge, you can instead use that item as a last resort to be like, I need to get this gauge down now. And I've only found like a couple of those items. And so it's really cool that like it will give you ways for characters who are not prepared to use those abilities, a way to significantly decrease the gauge, but it is explicitly spending a resource that is so far not super common. The other really cool thing is that the game leans into having multiple party members and switching them out mid-fight. One of the things that reduces your heat is swapping to party members.
So my favorite thing about like Final Fantasy X was like having everyone lined up and just like rotating through them in fights.
Yes, exactly. So it is that exact thing of like, okay, tag you in. And so when you tag someone in, it reduces the gauge slightly. And so not only is the game trying to get you to do this because it's like, oh, I need to get the character with that ability tagged in, but also tagging in is always beneficial to managing your gauge, even if you're not tagging in a character who has the right, ability types. And that's really sick. It also leads to like trying to figure out who you're putting in what row, because there are 4 rows and you can only tag in the other person in your row, which means that it's like, okay, I have 2 healers. Do I put them in the same row and assume that I will always need a healer on the field? Or do I put them in different rows and try and like, what role is going to be fighting in this particular position? And is this position going to be able to be useful if the enemy is like if the bar is targeting a specific ability? And like, that shit's really cool. That decision making is really engaging.
Very cool. Well, I've heard a lot of really good things about it. I'm curious, as a huge Chrono Trigger fan myself, I've been, if I didn't have a bunch of other games, I'm also trying to finish up from last year. Chained Echoes, Patrick Klepek's 2024,
Game of
2023. Yeah, game, like lining it up as one of those already. But I've heard incredibly good things about it. I've heard maybe like the localization is a little stiff, but that the world and story are pretty good, and the combat system is excellent. So that is cool to hear.
You get to be in a team with a dolphin man and a lion man, like within 30 minutes,
like God intended.
Yeah, exactly. It's so good.
That is very Chrono Trigger, actually. It's like instead of a frog, it's a dolphin. Okay, over the break, just pretty quickly, I did finish Signalis, a game that I thought was quite good. Did not care for the last area that much. I feel like maybe there's a world where like, hey Rob, I hope you feel better. But if Rob doesn't feel better, there's like a chance that maybe half of Monday's podcast we'll just do a spoiler cast on Signalis. And I've kept that in my back pocket as something we could do. There's a lot to unpack in that game. I think it is like a remarkable debut effort from that studio. Like, is just incredible to look at, and what it is swinging for on the fences narratively, even if in some ways I don't think it connects. Like, the ambition is just like ridiculous, and the confidence is ridiculous. And the inventory stuff, I mean, like, there's too many weapons at the end. I didn't need them all. Like, there's stuff like that just feels like could have been a little bit better. But I almost feel bad knocking the game for it, because the things that it's trying to do are so strong that it's like, okay, yeah, I didn't need a machine gun at the end. Like, that's fine.
See, that's interesting, because I totally did. I was down to my last bullets in that final boss fight. What ending did you get? Like,
I don't. I almost feel like we should hold that for the spoiler cast. I have issues with the way the game delivers, like, produces its ending for you. That is, I guess I will say, related to how you play. Yes. And I was a little frustrated at that because of the specific way in which I play these types of games.
I think I can guess your ending based on
yeah,
what
you can. It's
Yes,
like cool,
yes.
cool. Like you got a worse ending because you were careful. Like that kind of sucks.
The Silent Hill 2 problem.
Yeah, I don't like it. I think it's a bad way to do endings. And I like Silent Hill as well. So, yeah, great game, well worth playing. Like, if somehow you missed it, like, please track it down. Like, it is not altogether long. In fact, the faster you play it, the game says, "Oh, you're a better person." And so,
I don't think that's what it said. No, it's not what it
it still makes you feel shitty for being slow, is what I'll say. Like, I'm not narratively. We could get into that later. What exactly
we'll talk.
in the end?
I think we have to.
But I think the game is
maybe
sort of
even
conveying,
if Rob's
like,
back on Monday, we just kick him out of the room for like 30 minutes and we like get into it.
Pussy, maybe run through a room a little faster is kind of the vibe I got from the end of the game.
I'm gonna hold my tongue.
Just hold your tongue. We'll get there. I also finished the Calisto Protocol. Not a good game. Did I enjoy it? Yes, I did. The Calisto Protocol is like best expressed as I felt like I was playing like a sci-fi channel original with like the biggest like a budget given to James Cameron, and I found that delightful. It's just a shitty B movie with but the most gorgeous one you've ever had a chance to encounter. I don't like how the combat, the combat turned out. We went into all of that during our kind of like pseudo review when the game originally came out. I don't think it gets any better. It has one of the all-time horror games have bad end bosses traditionally. They just really don't know how to that is a consistent theme in horror games. It's like, what do we put at the end? Because games need you to have this, moment of culmination of mechanics and resources and yada yada. And horror games tend to fall flat on their face when developing what a final boss should be. And boy, Calisto Protocol both doesn't solve that and says, what if we made an even worse one? What if we made an all-time bad one? But it's very pretty. I highly recommend. I think that game, its easy mode is normal, its normal mode is hard, and its hard mode is extreme, or whatever you would kind of declare that as. I feel like this is going to be a game that shows up on Game Pass sometime early this year. That's not inside information. It just feels like one of those kinds of games. And if you get a chance to play it, if how I described it sounds appealing, just put that shit on easy. It won't be easy. It will just be more manageable and allow you to sort of enjoy what I think is the game's greatest strengths, which are like, it looks pretty as shit in the ugliest way possible. And for that, I enjoyed drinking a couple of beers and finishing the Calisto Protocol. In the service of time, because we still have other things going on in this podcast, I will save some of the other stuff. I finished like God of War. The one last thing I'll mention before we transition to the next part of the podcast is Sports Story, early contender for biggest disappointment of the year, even though it came out at the end of 2022. Golf Story, just a gem, just a wonderful game that came out early in the Switch's life. And Sports Story is extremely buggy. It has somehow deep optimization issues for a top-down pixel game where you hit a golf ball. I don't know how that can run at a poor frame rate, but it does. I don't know how much to read into this like hidden developer room in the game that sort of is the team shit talking one another about the game's development. It's kind of, it gives bad vibes. And so I played a couple hours. I put it down. If you go to Kotaku and search Sports Story, you'll find the piece that kind of explains that room a little further. But I played a couple hours and was like, boy, this was a surprise drop for the holidays that should have, the surprise should have been it's delayed again. Not have come out before the end of the year. So I'm kind of like, I waited this long for the game to come out. I can wait a month or two while they do some passes at the game. I mean, I've read things as simple as, like just lots of spots where people are just not making straight up progress in the game. And that's the kind of, that's a killer. Yeah. So I'm going to give that a little more time in the oven. They've said some patches are coming, but I have a hunch that even if it's patched, that it's still not going to be the game I was hoping it was going to be. Ren, before I toss to the middle segment of this podcast, you have pasted something into the chat. Can you please give us a House of Representatives update? Has anyone died?
No one has died yet. C-SPAN says Representative McCarthy does not have the votes. 10th speaker vote possible today. The current standing as of this recording is 73 McCarthy, 72 Jeffries, 7 Donalds, 3 Hearn for some fucking reason, and then 0 for others. The fact that they're adding in new candidates as the thing is proceeding is so fucking funny. It's so bad. It's so bad. What a dumb, beautiful thing.
Yeah, that is bad. All right, well, we are going to transition over for the middle segment of this podcast, which is going to be, do you want to hear Rob do some more Pentiment interviews? So he wasn't supposed to do this third one. Rob did a series of interviews related to both Obsidian and Pentiment specifically with Josh Sawyer and the name of the head of Obsidian, whose name I'm blanking on, but that was the second interview. Over the course, if you listen to those interviews, you discovered that Rob went to the same college as Josh Sawyer, the design director on Pentiment, and they actually shared a professor. And after the interview, my understanding is Microsoft came back to Rob, was like, hey, Josh, think it'd be cool if we all got you and those people on a call together and did another conversation. And so you are going to hear that conversation between Josh Sawyer, Rob Zacny, Dr. Edmund Kern, who is Rob and Josh's teacher, and Dr. Winston Black, who is Josh's classmate, who also consulted on Pentiment. And so I haven't heard this conversation, but I bet it's good. These have all been bangers that Rob has been doing on the interviews, and we're hoping to do a lot more of these throughout the year, including the whole crew. So we're going to bounce over to that, and then we'll be back with a little bit of mailbag.
And we are back now once again to discuss Pentiment a bit more, and particularly the history it is based on. Today, we are joined by Dr. Winston Black of St. Francis Xavier University and Dr. Edmund Kern of Lawrence University, and who was one of my professors and also one of Josh Sawyer's as well. And Winston, I assume you were a peer of Josh's once upon a time?
Exactly, yeah. We overlapped by several years.
So yeah, for a bit of table setting, you both consulted on this game. Can you explain, maybe starting with Dr. Kern, explain your academic specialties and sort of what you ended up bringing to bear on Pentiment?
Well, I'm a historian of early modern Europe, specializing in German-speaking areas of Europe, and especially the Habsburg monarchy. In addition, I've researched the history of religion, magic, and witchcraft, and consider myself a historian of religious culture. And it was in that context that I first encountered Josh as a student so many years ago. My involvement in Pentiment began, I'm sure Josh would know the date, but it was probably 5 or 6 years ago. He was in Appleton, and we were having dinner at a local restaurant, and he raised the issue of whether or not I might be willing to consult on a game that he was thinking about. I think he was still at the stage of pitching it rather than actually designing it, but he had a fairly good idea of how he wanted it to proceed. And given the fact that I've spent a lot of time, at least metaphorically, in the 16th century, I thought it was probably a good fit and a little bit of an adventure for me as well.
And Winston, your background and involvement with the game.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I am a medieval historian, especially the High Middle Ages, 11th through 13th centuries. I specialize in the history of medicine and science, death, and especially the Black Death, the history of the plague and medicines and drugs that were used to treat diseases in the period. And Josh contacted me about 2 years ago, I believe it was, I think when planning had come a lot farther on the game, because he was able to show me some mock-ups and characters but he knew he wanted a significant element of the life cycle, medicine and disease, and just death, a lot of death and dead bodies as well. And so we've stayed in touch over the years. I haven't seen him in person since 1999 or so, but through Facebook and Twitter, we've kept track of each other. And it was a great way to really reconnect with him.
And of course, we are also joined by Josh. Josh, I am curious, I think we talked a bit about Pentiment on a previous show, but I am curious now, knowing this background, for how long was this period, this era as a setting sort of stuck in your head? And when did Pentiment begin to come together as a game development project you wanted to pursue?
I think, by the way, I will say my excuse is that I got carried away telling my coworkers about the history of the Albigensian Crusade. So that's my reasoning.
I had covered for you. Nobody was going to know that you walked into the lecture late.
I blew it. I have to admit that. Anyway, but no, the 16th century or just the early modern period, late medieval, that's probably been an interest since I was in high school. Just found it very interesting. I think transitional periods are very exciting and interesting to me. And the more I kind of dug into how literacy changed society, and obviously the Reformation changed society a great deal, I thought that I had a great affinity for the time period in this region. And I wasn't quite sure, yes, this is the time period in which I would like to set any historical game. But when I started thinking about this game, which was around 2018, I immediately knew I want to do early 16th century Holy Roman Empire. Eventually that drifted specifically to being on a trade route in the Upper Bavarian area. So yeah, I kind of coalesced around that.
So I'm curious for you two professors, there's obviously, you end up teaching intro classes to people, and then of course you teach more advanced courses. But I'm curious, when you are dealing with sort of newcomers to university or people just coming into contact with this history and these themes for the first time, what are some of the most dogged misunderstandings of the period that people tend to bring, the most the assumptions that won't die when people approach this era?
I'll start off. The central sort of misconception that I have to deal with is the idea that belief in magic and the prosecution of witches was a kind of medieval phenomenon, and the witchcraft trials of the European history took place primarily during those periods that we identify as the scientific revolution and Enlightenment. The high point was from 1580 to 1640, so well within the so-called early modern period rather than the medieval period. More generally, I think people have a hard time negotiating the boundary between a past which in many respects was very, very different and a past which in other respects was not so dissimilar from our own time. In other words, the sort of pace of life, the realities of life, the material conditions of life were very, very different. But when it comes to things like, basic fears, anxieties, motives, people were motivated by a lot of the same kinds of things that motivate us, or people feared a lot of the same kinds of things that we feared, albeit in a radically different setting and within a radically different belief system. And so it's my job to try and negotiate that boundary so that they can recognize both similarity and difference in a sort of way that's, historically sensible, so to speak. I don't know, Winston, whether you'd want to pick up with your own.
Yeah, definitely. Those are some of the issues I'm dealing also with when, especially teaching the 16th and 17th century, the period of Pentiment, but moving back into the medieval period more broadly, I think what I want to try to overcome with students is they and pop culture in general tends to create this false binary where we today are rational and scientific and somehow more peaceful, and the Middle Ages are just superstitious and overwhelmingly violent. And these attitudes get indulged in movies and video games that are set in the Middle Ages. And what I guess a simple lesson I bring to my students is especially true with the history of medicine and science. Yes, they were wrong, but that doesn't mean they're foolish or superstitious. They were deeply rational. And we can see some of that in Pentiment, where they're thinking about humors and the Socratic method and styles of argumentation and observation. And so they're deeply engaged with thinking and organizing their world. It's different than our way, and we need to understand the difference. But it comes back to some of what Ed was saying, that these people on an individual level are more like us than we might tend to believe when we only focus on the 95 Theses or the Black Death or the Crusades. If we just look at daily life, we see ourselves there more easily.
Well, one thing that I've found myself saying over the years to my students is that, peasants were ignorant of many things, but they were not stupid.
Yes.
And one thing that I know comes up in the game Pentiment is inheritance strategies. Mm-hmm. Ordinary people had to think very complexly and very rationally about how to pass property from one generation to the next. How wealth was to be divided up in not necessarily an equal fashion, but in an equitable fashion, so that people could be taken care of in different ways, whether it was through marriage or through, in the case of women, the maintenance of dower, that is a right to a percentage of the property that they brought into the marriage, and, things of that nature. I think that we still think about that. We may now think in terms of, well, how do we pay for health care? How do we how do we take care of parents who are too old to take care of themselves? How do we pay for higher education? But the same kinds of strategizing were very much present in the 16th century.
Sorry, this is a complete aside. It has nothing to do with Pentiment, but I'm so curious. I've got two academics here. I've got two professors. I am curious whether or not, you have detected a change among students due to paradox video games. Because as you were talking about, inheritance law and such, there's a series of video games, Crusader Kings, where, people who play this game get incredibly conversant in different, traditions of inheritance law that without this game, I don't think anybody would have heard of. And I am curious, in the last 20 years, have you encountered students who are down some odd little rabbit holes that you can trace back to popular strategy games?
Oh, I've met a grad student who I, after the fact, learned was deeply immersed in Crusader Kings 2. And I could then understand some patterns in their thought. I don't know if I've seen it in my undergrads, though. I'm not sure what games they're playing. Fallout mostly, actually.
Yeah, I can't think of any titles off the top of my head, but a number of students have approached me after class when we've been covering some esoteric topic, and they say, oh, you really need to check out this game, because that's one of the aspects of this game that you could pursue. So there is a lot of awareness.
So I am curious, in terms of how the consultancy worked, for one, have you all played the game or had a chance to see how it is? And I'm curious, when you're working with Josh, to what degree is it sending off questions just for background, and to what degree are you also seeing builds or notes on a script? And Josh, feel free to jump in here as well as how you sort of utilize this expertise.
I'll jump in here, especially because I finished the game just today at lunchtime and wept. I wept.
Oh, wow.
You bastard!
Sorry.
No, I mean I got choked up like 3 or 4 distinct times in that game. Like there are a series of gut punches, usually at the opening or closing of different acts.
Yeah, absolutely, and without giving away any secrets, but it did come as a shock because I didn't know about certain aspects of the game. My engagement with Josh was usually over some very specific questions. There's some broader issues of medicine and healing. We had a few longer conversations about over Zoom or something. And then there was on and off over a period of about a year, specific email questions would come my way. And they were great little puzzles, especially because they often were directly related to my research. I could feel like this wasn't taking away from my day job. So it was on and off, probably a period of 9 months over 2020 and 2021 where we dealt with little and bigger issues of medicine and doctors and midwives and so on.
I recall a few general questions to start out with, and I put together some like longer reports on things like Jews in Europe, popular, what we might call popular culture, or, the celebration of like holidays or holy days within the context of popular culture, things like that. But one of my favorite things to do in terms of my involvement in this game was to just follow the trail towards an answer prompted by a question that Josh just emailed me from my perspective out of the blue. I'm sure it was something that had been on his mind for a while and, that they had been slowly working into the game, but then I would get a question and I'd have to go in pursuit of an answer. And those were kind of fun. Everything from like, what color vestment might might a cleric be wearing for this particular day in this particular kind of celebration or ceremony, to, what was it like for women to inherit property during this period? What were their legal rights and obligations, as well as protections afforded them by the law? And so it was always fun to just kind of hunt down, and try to be as concise as possible in my response, hunt down answers to those kinds of questions.
Yeah, and the way that I tried to utilize the consultants was sparingly, both because they don't have infinite time. They both have a bunch of other responsibilities. But also, I considered it my responsibility to do as much research as I could on my own to try to put things together. And then it was usually when I was in a place of uncertainty or a dead end. So there'd be cases where I thought I had the lay of the land, and I'd be like, I think I understand how this dynamic works. I think I understand how these people would interact. I don't know. And so then I would send to Ed, or, we talked a lot about the examination with Winston. I talked a lot about the examination of the body of the Baron, and, all the nuances that went into that. Would they cut the body open? And, who is he? He's a Baron. Well, they're probably not going to jump at that. His wife is coming. Okay, they're also probably not. So there are all these considerations that are more about social dynamics and considerations than necessarily like a strict black and white, yes, they would, no, they wouldn't. And so getting into those nuances was very important to make it feel plausible and make the characters feel like they were reacting as characters to the circumstance that was in front of them. We were actually going to do an examination of a body in the second act for someone who is of much lower status. That didn't come up, but there was the potential there based on the training of the person who would have likely done it and a bunch of other things that maybe that would have been more like an actual autopsy. But alas, it never happened. But anyway, I'm glad that I had all those conversations with Winston to figure that out, or with Ed, again, property inheritance, I thought I kind of understood it, but I didn't. And so like when I dug into it and I sort of proposed things, then Ed said, okay, here's the nuance to this, and here are all the dynamics that come into it. And I think that getting into all those details, again, like Ed said, they largely are thinking about real things that impact them on a daily basis, or maybe not on a daily basis, but like something like the toadfall, the death, essentially the death tax, became increasingly onerous. And if you're the head of your family dies and half of your belongings essentially are taken away from you, that's not nothing. Like, people care about that. And so understanding the extent to which this existed in society and what tools people employed to fight against it or work around it was really important. So yeah, and then the other place was just dead ends. Sometimes I would try to do research and either I couldn't find it in a language that I could understand, or it was fragmentary, or, it's like a $500, like volume of something that I just can't get. And so then I would reach out, and often to Ed, and I remember one in particular where I was just desperate to find sort of practical information on hunting, like not so much about high hunts of nobles, but like just the practice, the act of going on a hunt. And it was very hard to find. And Ed found a 1910 manuscript in German in Fraktur. And I was like, let me dig into this. And it gave me the info I needed to do the Act 2 hunt. So it's all that sort of stuff where it's usually either dead ends or knowing that I don't know, knowing that I'm in an uncertain place and needing to reach out for actual expertise rather than my kind of amateur sleuthing.
There was a nice little out for me that I knew that Josh was a good historian, because oftentimes I could find something, and I probably wrote a dozen times, I could look into this further if you want me to, or you could just take a look at this.
Here's a PDF. Take a look.
Yeah. And Josh usually rose to the occasion and said, okay, he was going to do it.
So one of the themes that I really appreciate in Pentiment is sort of this idea of the various contested grounds of thought that exist, and the idea of, like, for instance, in the town, there's kind of the question of, well, who are we? Like, where are we from? It turns out to be the central mystery, or the key to the central mystery. But, you also see it when we're talking about, like, medicine in this period. Like, this is a thing that runs through this is this notion of there are traditions of folk remedies and like inherited knowledge that exists in this community, but it is not taken seriously by elites, but it is vital to the function of the community. And then you have this, later in the game, you hang out with some of the higher status characters, the town doctor, the inventor, and they're like hanging out with a bunch of like traveling Italian scholars. And they sort of try to pull you into a debate about, does medicine need to move beyond the classical texts that we've inherited? That is the only, because they're classical, because they're old, this is the only recognized authoritative text that exists, even though all of us know that they are now hopelessly out of date, because kind of the third element happening here is that there is increasing awareness of more recent techniques that appeared in like the Middle East, but also in more cosmopolitan parts of Europe. You were starting to see the scientific method starting to take shape. You're starting to see investigations in this. And this is one of the interesting things I found about this like game. And I'd love to like have you discuss it a bit, because, when we talked about the misconceptions people have, I think it's very easy to imagine in this period that everyone is kind of flying blind when it comes to medical care and like, how does the body work? I think we tend to adopt the sort of the Monty Python lens of history, where they probably believe this kind of stuff. And what I find so interesting in Pentiment is that you actually kind of have a weird thing where there's things they're allowed to acknowledge because they're, the inherited classical text, but they know they're wrong. but because of like the social importance placed on these things, they can't move on from it, even though you have newer and better sources of information. That's the thing I find really interesting, is that like you sort of get this picture into an era where people kind of know the field is changing rapidly, but in a weird way, it can't be codified.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point there, where we tend to focus, and it's a trap that we history professors fall into a lot, where we'll grab a single date and say, this changed, or this book was published, and that creates some major marker in history. And it is worth knowing these. What I'm thinking here about when we're talking about bodies would be Andreas Vesalius's On the Fabric of the Human Body in 1527, so same time as Pentiment Act 2. Yes, hugely important, but that didn't change things overnight. That was a more limited urban phenomenon, and the classical and medieval traditions, whether it's of the herbal remedies or of their understanding of anatomy and how you treat injuries, it doesn't go away. They're going to keep on holding on to a lot of the medieval ideas for 100, 200 years and more. So I think that was one of the things that I was happiest about seeing play out in the game, where the Pentiment, the overlaying of the traditions, what was taught in the medieval university for 300 years by this point is not gonna just go away. We're gonna have this mixing and layering still of traditions, whether it's of medicine or law or of religious beliefs. But yeah, I think we can see it especially with those characters grappling with these medical questions. I think because they're not as contentious as the religious ones, where should we still be reading Dioscorides, a first century author, or Pliny the Elder for another first century author? Do we retranslate them, or do we just throw them out? The questions are there, but it's not going to change the way they did things for centuries.
And I should say that specific conversation with the Bolognese doctors was something that I discussed with Winston, because I knew I wanted to have this sort of social encounter. But then I said, like, what would they be talking about? Like, what would these Italian doctors working in a city where there's a lot of experimentation going on, talking with this German doctor who's clearly very, very interested? Werner Stolz is always like talking about like Italian techniques and Italian texts and things like that. And also even Brother Florian, the infirmarian in the Abbey, he's very interested in reading Italian texts and learn some Italian so that he can read some of this stuff. And and it's not even conclusive in their own conversation. They have very strong disagreements. Werner says, well, we still use it in all of our practices, so seems like the answer's settled. We're just going to keep using it. But then Angelo and the other characters are like, I don't think it's that clear. Like, it's none of the stuff is just going to go away overnight. And, I think Winston and I also talked about like some herbal remedies and techniques were effective either partially or actually just totally effective, and some were not, or they had a placebo effect, but they didn't have the ability to sort all of this stuff out. So without better knowledge, they're just going to keep using all of this stuff as they go on. And some of the techniques they use are actually effective and good and helpful, and some are not, and some are probably harmful, just as some emerging surgical techniques could be helpful and some are probably extremely harmful. They're in a very, again, times of change, I think, are very interesting to explore in a story.
I loved the element later on, but it's not, I don't think, giving away too much, but Sister Gertrude, I think it is. Yeah. Yeah. She's still using Hildegard of Bingen from the 12th century. And whether or not they actually were using Hildegard at that period is neither here nor there. We know that plenty of 11th and 12th century medieval medical texts are still filling the monastic libraries in this period and being used and being put into print. So they're not simply replacing one system with another willy-nilly. Yeah.
Well, and Winston, you alluded to something interesting there that hadn't really occurred to me, but I'm curious if this is something we do see in the currents of history around this period, which is this idea that, you know, there are areas where discoursing too freely about certain subjects that are very dynamic in this period is very dangerous, either politically or like theologically. And then there are places where you can discuss a little bit more freely, but those can also, like, you know, are they also being used as places where you can sort of by proxy discuss bigger issues about like the doctrines people are cleaving to in this era? And I'm curious, like, when you look at this era in like medicine and science, like do you see a bit of that in terms of this being a space where like freer thought is permitted, but it is also sort of tiptoeing around maybe more central questions of the period?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it comes back to this question of authority, of where do we get our knowledge from? And after the high and late Middle Ages, being satisfied with centuries here of knowing this is our knowledge. We've got the Bible and Aristotle and Hippocrates. We know how the universe works, but I think one of those medicine could form one of those safer areas where you could skirt around some of the more dangerous issues that we see with Lutheranism and questions about, I guess, the very economic identity of peasants and lords. So, like, contemporary nearly with the Pentiment story is the German doctor Paracelsus, Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim Paracelsus. And he made a big show, directly inspired by Luther. He threw his copies of Galen and Hippocrates on a fire to show, I'm throwing away the old medicine and I'm creating a new way of thought. And people would actually call him the Luther of medicine, the Luther of medicine. And so I think you see, here's a way where you could deal with some of these bigger issues of overcoming, throwing away ancient authority, maybe a little more safely than the Reformation itself, which sadly, like, of course, led to the wars of religion and the death of millions of people. Medicine wasn't quite as dangerous in that respect.
The game ends around 1543, and there was actually, at one point, there was a plot element involving on the revolution of celestial spheres. Mm-hmm. And like, that was only published after Copernicus died. Yeah. He had been talking about it with people, and almost in a way like, but like, wouldn't it be crazy if the sun were the center? I mean, I'm not saying it is, but like, wouldn't that be crazy? Because that would make sense, right? But that's crazy. So yeah, like it really depended on whose authority you're challenging. And if you're challenging essentially biblical authority, that's a kind of rough road to walk, obviously, for Copernicus. He said, like, by the way, after I'm gone, send this stuff out. But yeah, it's an interesting period. And I think you're right, though, depending on the authority being challenged and in what company you're doing it, there's more or less leeway to talk about that. Something that has come up in the context of, I've seen people comment on the overall kind of, let's say, class, in big quotation marks I'm making here in the air, class distinctions, and like that the game is viewing this period through a Marxist kind of lens, which is a little true, but now I'm lost my train of thought, which is incredible. I was going to say, well, like, one of the critiques that Engels had of the peasant uprising is that it couldn't really be revolutionary, which in part is true because the peasants were very careful in many cases to not tread on the emperor. They're like, look, man, my issue is not with the emperor. The issue is with our lords. Our lords are being bad. We love the emperor. The empire is great. Long live the emperor. But got to do something about these taxes, please. And so everyone has to be aware of power dynamics. You know, like whether you're discussing religious things, like Václav in the Forest, the Romani, has some extremely outlandish Minocchio-like religious beliefs, but he's kind of shooting the shit in the woods with you. He's not going up to the abbot and telling him these things. So yeah, the company you're keeping and who you're talking about and who those people are going to talk to obviously have a big influence on how that stuff is received. And in the case of peasants doing an uprising, they're like, look, this isn't about the emperor. This is about our lords managing our daily lives. So please, emperor, don't kill us for doing this.
Yeah, as both of you have pointed out, so much of these discussions and so much of the controversy is context dependent. In other words, you might say certain things in certain company, but not those things in different company. Another element to this, at least when it comes to the level of what we might call learned discourse, there was actually quite a bit of freedom isn't quite the right word, but quite a bit of discretion to present odd ideas as long as they were presented as speculation. In fact, this is what gets Galileo into trouble about 100 years later, is that he's given permission to explore the Copernican system, but he's told to do so as speculation. And he unfortunately names the character defending the old Aristotelian Ptolemaic system the simpleton. And so he's not even thinly veiling his own opinion, so to speak. But, if we go back to the early 16th century, one of the great advantages of setting the game during this period is that it's a period of tremendous flux. Not only in terms of changes in medical knowledge, not only in terms of the shift from a kind of feudal system where there's a landlord vassal or a lord serf relationship toward a landlord tenant relationship, but also in religion as well. It's not going to be until the 1560s, 1570s that doctrinal churches that we can identify, so to speak, as, doctrinally Lutheran, doctrinally Calvinist, doctrinally Catholic, in a new post-Council of Trent way, begin to emerge. And so there's a lot of room for these characters to explore these ideas and the different opportunities that are emerging out of this period of flux, so to speak.
I was actually going to ask, because I can't remember the exact year, but when did More write Utopia? It was around this time. It was early 16th century.
Yeah, I want to say 1530, 1530.
Yeah.
I think is the period.
But yeah, he did the classic thing where the character espousing all the objectionable beliefs was not Thomas More. It was this fictional character, and then the character Thomas More was like, those ideas are so crazy. How can you say that? But yeah, again, when you're challenging the king's authority, you have to kind of be careful and say, like, no, this isn't me saying this. This is this crazy hypothetical character. And if you don't do that, then yes, you become Galileo.
One of the so the funny thing is, when I was playing Pentiment, I definitely felt like I expected there to be a lot more Wars of Reformation stuff happening in your face, right? Because the opening when you meet the noble who is going to be the first murder victim and gets you in trouble because he is like touching every like live wire conversation topic you possibly can, but like definitely there's a lot of hanging the Reformation shotgun on the wall over the fireplace. And what's funny is I prepared for the game to be much more, again, I get maybe sort of about the popular, imagination of what this period was like, where one day it's, the church triumphant, and then 2 weeks later it's a bunch of us are Lutherans now, and it's time for the princes to assert their authority. But what I thought was really interesting here is that in some ways, like some of the story, even setting aside the Reformation stuff that is happening in the background, is, I don't know if it's a revolution in the church is probably the wrong way to put it, because what it feels more like is that the edifice of the medieval church is just kind of rotting and crumbling like beneath you in this story, and a different instantiation of the Catholic Church is taking its place. That the monastery and the scriptorium are themselves artifacts of a different era of church and church governance, and that's something that I found really interesting, because it's not something often as one talks about when we cover like changes in the Catholic Church in this period. It's always about the Reformation and the popular imagination. It's often the conversations are joined. What I find interesting here is that already there's signs that some of the pillars of the church that have existed for, centuries, if not millennia at this point, those are already giving way independent of Luther. And I'm curious to talk through this again, this idea of complicating what for a lot of people is a simple causal story about the change of the religious complexion in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, that's because it is complicated. And we have a Benedictine abbey that is at least several centuries old, and many characters in the game don't even know how old it is, which is not surprising. And so it's a double monastery. It's Benedictine. It has a scriptorium inexplicably at the beginning of the 16th, well, explained, but like, wow, that's crazy. And yeah, it wasn't like the Catholic Church formed and then it just existed. And then in the 16th century, Luther said, this is crazy. And then everyone, then there was this big divide. Like, and also it's worth saying that, one, there were many other would-be reformers, or Jan Hus is like 100 years earlier. It didn't go well. Many other people. And in this period, like Erasmus, there were many people who also said, don't get me wrong, the Catholic Church needs to reform things. They need to fix things, but they weren't going as far. And in fact, we're separating themselves from Luther and we're saying, hey, this is kind of getting out of hand. Like, we have to let the church be the church, and they are the authority, and we can critique it, but like it has to be done within them. So yeah, the idea that it was really this continuous history that then was interrupted by Martin Luther, and then everyone just kind of split. And yeah, I mean, if you go to Bavaria right now, it's not exactly a Lutheran hotbed. So even in the best of cases, it probably wasn't going to immediately become Lutheran. But yeah, it was more complicated. And that was also to sort of show, because there was a distinction in the Peasant Uprising. It's interesting because there's a conflation of the peasants' cause with Luther, which then happened in the period, and Luther wrote against the thieving, murderous hordes of peasants, explicitly rejecting their association of their stuff with him, to which some peasants said, like, no, we didn't even get this idea from you. This is, our lives suck, and it's not Christian, and the foundation of it can be found in the Bible, as we describe in the 12 Articles. And they even say at the end of the 12 Articles, their 12th article is, yo, if we're out of line here, and you guys don't think that us saying that there's a basis for this in doctrine is true, let us know, and you can change our minds. But it's more complicated. The causes are not the same, and the idea of the church being this monolith is just, it's not true. I'm kind of rambling at this point, but yeah, that was the point.
I mean, it took a while for Lutherans to become Lutheran. In other words, Luther sometimes used the phrase evangelical Christianity, referring back to a Christianity that was based on Holy Scripture. But, the idea of a Lutheran church, as I alluded to earlier, doesn't really emerge until, the 1560s, 1570s. So there's several decades of flux where there are people who are, following Lutheran doctrine or taking it in directions that Luther himself may not have foreseen, who still think of themselves as not exactly Catholic because they've made a break with the church in a sense, but they're not thinking of themselves as this other thing yet, this easily identifiable denomination. That takes several decades to emerge.
So one of the things, like ultimately in the end, like one of the keys to the mystery is this idea of the town itself being contested ground in terms of what are its origins? What are the origins of the people who live here? What are the origins of the political order that's sort of formed around them? And a lot of it centers on, like, whose land was this? Was it pagan land? Did the Romans convert, pagans to Christianity? Did Christians convert Romans? Like, this is the mystery ends up hinging on this, which was interesting in a couple ways, because for one thing, I think it's easy for us to sort of forget that people in the Middle Ages or early Renaissance might have had similar questions about just like origin stories for, like, we recognize ourselves as some sort of community or like proto-nation, but like what is that sort of founded on? But it also kind of struck me as being reminiscent as well in terms of some questions that seem increasingly like central to modern scholarship and imaginings of the medieval period and Reformation. The idea that identity has always been complicated, has always been a political conversation, and not necessarily just a matter of recognizing, autochthonous communities that sprang up somewhere. And so I'm curious if that, for one, Josh, I'm curious if that's kind of intentional, if this is kind of this sort of mystery that exists at the start of this, is this also kind of a proxy for some of the ways that this is contested ground today in popular discourse? And then for our two professors, I'm also curious to what degree do these conversations kind of echo conversations that are happening within academic circles about how we handle these subjects in academia?
I think, if I may, I was just going to say that, I think identity in a lot of cases people take for granted, or they either take for granted or they accept at face value the stories that they've been told by their own families, the things that get passed down. So a lot of there's some sort of sketchy assumptions within the community of Tassing that reflect very real things that have happened for me. I've done a lot of genealogical research and discovered things, and other people have asked me to do genealogical research for them, and they have had their worlds kind of rocked because they're like, we are German. Our family has been German for ever and ever and ever. And we go back and you're Danish, you're not ambiguously, your whole family is Danish. There's no German here, or Norwegian or something else, or actually your family didn't come from this region at all. They're from somewhere else entirely. And it shakes people because, again, their family told them this, and their family was told that by someone else. And so we pass on a lot of this stuff orally. And also records are fallible and fragile. And yes, we have digitization. Yes, we have incredible capacity for communication now that didn't exist before. But all of this is very fragile and also not necessarily true or true to the best that we can understand. It's a very sketchy thing. And in many cases, people live in places where they literally don't recognize the foundations of things. You can walk around Cologne, and that was Colonia. That was a Roman colony. And sometimes it's obvious that you're walking by Roman stuff. And sometimes it is literally impossible unless you're really directly looking at it to realize, the idea of, well, I'm not going to get into this, but there are churches within Cologne that are built on Roman crypts. Sure, built a Christian church right over the top of that. No problem. It's totally fine. So, I think we still deal with this. We still deal with either accepting a kind of a story that's been told to us, not necessarily told to us with malice or ill intent, but passed on in good faith that somehow got twisted over time and it's inaccurate or totally wrong or whatever. But it's obviously of central importance in the story of Pentiment.
Yeah, the narrative, especially, I mean, of the whole game, but especially the final act of discovering these layers and deciding what they're going to do with that past. Do we confront it in a radical way? Do we sweep it under the rug? I mean, it really reminded me painfully of, we see this every year right now as the internet battle for where did Christmas come from happens again. And I used to fight that, but I've given up. But you got really on the one side, Christmas begins with baby Jesus, and the other saying, no, evil Christians stole it from Roman Saturnalia or this or that pagan feast. And again, we fall into that simple binary that people want. And Pentiment again shows that both are true. It's a lot more complicated. Yes, there are Roman foundations to the stories and to the literal buildings, but you need to give credit and diligence to the centuries of development of Saint Mauritius and Satya and whoever it may be, that these are real for these people, just as real as the buildings, even if that the word you used there, Rob, the autochthonous foundations, are challenging to some people. So it comes back to the teaching we do. We try to do history, but often good history is history of history, and then the history of someone's history, and the layer and the layer and the layer, and showing how delightfully complicated the layers are.
I mean, history as a discipline has been divided up into sometimes what we call fields, Europe, Africa, East Asia, things like that. But really pretty much within all of these fields, the movement has been towards greater recognition of globalism, or what's sometimes called transnationalism. And the basic idea behind these approaches, I mean, to be really reductive about it, is to pay attention to the interconnectedness of things. And one really fruitful development has been the application of post-colonial methodologies to earlier periods of European history, where you can begin to see these layers, you can begin to see these interconnections, so that, what was once thought, as Josh was suggesting, as, echt Deutsch, pure German, really isn't, and never was in a sense. There's an ongoing conversation and discussion, not only in academic circles about the interconnectedness of things, but I dare say probably in the past, there was this ongoing discussion about identity, who we are, where we came from, and so on down the line.
Yeah, I couldn't help but this part of the story about, especially the way it concerns Roman origins, and the fact that some people like the idea that they're all descended from Romans, and that this is a triumph of Christianity over, the virtuous Romans who just needed that one last thing to become God's elect. But it reminded me a lot of because I follow this conversation a little more, it being my background, but ongoing conversations in the field of classics, and sort of trying to deal with the fact that it draws people who have a predisposition to white supremacist ideologies, even without necessarily knowing that that's what they're being drawn to. But it attracts people, it's a meme now on Twitter, if somebody has a white marble statue of a classical author, buckle your seatbelt. You're about to hear the worst, most offensive shit in your life.
Which I gotta say is so perfect, that their image of the past is the stripped bare marble.
Yeah.
That is such a perfect encapsulation of what is wrong with that.
Purified and oversimplified. Yeah.
But it reminded me of that, of the classics field is sort of struggling with this, with now you're having to figure out how do you responsibly teach these subjects, because you're drawn to it because you do believe these fields have value, and these works and these cultures are particularly worth studying, but also there is it's kind of indivisible from this idea of the West that has become like deeply problematic and frequently toxic. And in some ways, like when I look at the, you know, the story that's happening in Pentiment, where there's people who are like, you know, like there are people who are like, we, you know, in some ways it's kind of, you know, two different versions of it. You have some of the people who are nostalgic for like, man, we used to be virtuous pagans, just like hanging out in the woods and live, you know, living according to our beliefs. And then we were brutally colonized and these things were suppressed. But this is our land. We're the ones who it truly belongs to. And then you have people who are like, oh yeah, you know, we're descended from the Romans who came and fixed this place up, and like we're descended from the saints, you know, of this period, and that sort of put me in mind of these ongoing debates where people are trying to lay claim to wildly disparate like historical narratives and traditions, but also with an eye toward like claiming some sort of natural moral right to a worldview.
There is, I know that I've talked a lot about Name of the Rose as an inspiration for the game. Umberto Eco's Baudolino was also an inspiration. And part of that, a big part of the story involves the titular character and his buddies at the University of Paris concocting an entire false history about the three kings in Cologne and constructing a fake body to legitimize the coronation of the emperor, who's his adoptive father. But like, Cologne, the three crowns in the crest of Cologne represent the three kings. And so it's kind of Echo saying, what if a bored university student and his buddies actually just concocted all of this? Sure, that could happen. Like in many cases, we have one source, two sources on what happened, and we have no archaeological evidence. And we go like, all right, sure, I guess this is the way that it is. But like, that was a whole effort to specifically legitimize this one guy's coronation because of the association of this stuff, but it's all based on a fabrication. It's all based on a fiction. And yes, like you said, many people don't understand why they're being drawn to this, but in many cases, it's a simplified kind of heroic narrative. It's not complicated. And the thing is, I see classicists and I see historians that are exhausted on Twitter, especially, trying to convey the nuance and the difference. And it's so hard when there are so many people who want a very simple, clean story that is told in a straightforward way with no, but also, and you have to consider, but sometimes they don't want to hear any of that. And that's got to be very hard for people right now in those fields.
Well, and like most pointedly, I think like a lot of times in games where this discussion tends to come up is it tends to be in this really reductive. So were they all white there or not? Were they all white people? And like coming from the classics background, obviously, you know, there's we don't really know, like race wasn't constructed like in the same way. We know that in a lot of like, you know, major cities, of course, in this period, like, no, they were wildly diverse, like cities have been throughout history. But like, you know, you end up in this weird place where it's like, I don't know, man, like we can't like pull the demographic surveys of like the Balkans in like the 1000s and be like, it was this. And if they'd ever seen somebody with darker skin, they would have lost their mind. But often the discussion puts you in these weird places of like, you're being asked to make like blanket statements about how race existed and was perceived in these earlier periods. And the weird thing is, like, at least in the classics field, these discussions don't correlate with the sources, like, because the sources tend not to be interested in this stuff in the same way. And I'm curious, like, how you experience that as medievalists and early modern scholars.
Yeah, it is sad to say an issue that is in many ways tearing the field apart. Questions over race or the construction of race in the Middle Ages, the very definition, can we use the word medieval or Middle Ages for anywhere outside of Western Europe? Whose medieval is it anyway? So yeah, it is something I grapple with in my teaching, and certainly so glad to see the Ethiopian Coptic monk Sebhat, is that his name? Yeah, in the game, where I find students, They do actually want. They're now being raised in a world of assumed diversity, and I think that's good. Generally, the students are more open-minded than a Twitter thread, and it is exciting but difficult to find that way to expand the narrative. But then we run into the problem as professors say, I've got my training really in England and France and Holy Roman Empire. And I want to talk about North Africa. I want to talk about the Near East or even farther. Can I? Should I? And so it's an exciting time, but it's a time when these boundaries, as Ed was addressing, are fruitfully being torn down. But we're now asking, we've got the big question of what are we left with? How do we rebuild our history of history?
I think a lot of people don't have the time to look into the complexities of the past. And so, I'm as guilty of this as anybody else. We need to generalize. We cannot always particularize. It seems to me that telling stories about the past involves a kind of constant navigation back and forth between what you hope to be productive generalizations and the recognition that once you begin to really focus in on something, you see a very complicated picture. And, we're slowly weaving into the story of European history, whether it's, the period of classical antiquity, where, before there was a Europe in a sense, or the European Middle Ages or the European modern period. We're slowly weaving into that story an awareness that there were a great variety of people moving around. Were the majority of people, ethnically European, whatever that means? Yes. Were they linguistically European, whatever that means? Yes. But that didn't mean that you didn't have very different kinds of people moving throughout the area. Perhaps not in the same large numbers as we see today, but it was not this kind of, whitewashed society where everybody looked the same, talked the same, and believed the exact same things. We get that false picture from our desire to generalize.
I try to deal with some of these issues on the simplest level just by illustrating for students or readers a few key figures. One of my favorites is a monk, Constantine the African in Italy. And everyone knows he's from Africa. We don't know what he looked like. No one was concerned with his skin color, but it was essential to his identity and the people around him that, oh, yeah, you came from, we now know, probably Tunisia, but you're an African, and that's something they know. A minority, but they're is part of their European world. And there's plenty of figures we could name like that.
As we wrap up here, the last thing I want to sort of cite is so much of this game centers on big community events and feasts and celebrations in this. And it did put me in mind of a viral Twitter thread talking about the medieval peasant life, sort of portraying it as an idyllic time of very vibes-based living. The capitalism took this away from us, and the medieval peasant actually had tons of time just hang with the buds, and have big festival celebrations. And that's sort of the last thing I wanted to sort of raise is to what degree is some of this nostalgia just completely rose tinted, and to what degree is it founded on something? Because I was talking to someone else today in the games industry who sort of noted that they suspect one reason that big chatty podcasts have gotten so popular is we live in an age of profound isolation, profound social atomization, and I think one reason that Pentiment is so charming is because it's kind of a fantasy of every day you kind of go out there and you take part in the fabric of the life of a community that probably many of us do not have any sort of experience with today. And so I'm as we sort of wrap this up, I am curious to what degree we find this idea of communal living or community life, in Pentiment, and sort of these ideas that like this sort of alienation is a capitalist phenomenon. I'm curious to what degree you sort of evaluate that as well-founded, and to what degree it's kind of just rose-tinted nostalgia.
I'm going to take that, Ed.
It's mostly nostalgia.
Yeah.
To give a very non-historical answer, I'd recommend that those people try and grow an acre of wheat and turn it into flour by the end of the growing season. It was an enormous, yes, the communal aspect of that sentimentality, I think, was in a sense there. But that is, I think, treated, as you suggested, in ways that are characteristic of people who put on rose-tinted glasses. But it was an enormous amount of work, an enormous amount of labor. And not just for peasants, people who were involved in the crafts or the trades, regularly worked with the sun. And when the sun was out for 13 or 14 hours a day or more, you worked for 13 or 14 hours a day or more. And so, in a sense, we have a lot more leisure now than people did in pre-modern and early modern times. Although there were times of the years, there were times of the years where they did, obviously not do as much labor as during the growing season.
Yeah, I'm reminded, I think it was you, Josh, a comment you made on Twitter about quoting Lady Downton, Dowager Justice, what is a weekend? And then, that's in the early 20th century. But yeah, it's for all the humor there. It's a reminder. They didn't have a weekend. They had church, yes, and it was mostly obligatory by the 16th century. And for the first part of your question about this rose-tinted image of feasts all the time, it's almost a pre-internet meme. I think it's already earlier in the 20th century. You would get books which would list all of the medieval feasts and make the erroneous claim that, oh, well, the lazy medieval Catholic peasant would have every one of these days off. No, those feasts didn't necessarily exist in their community, and they still are working. Yeah. Maybe they're not out plowing the fields, but you are mending your clothes, you're tending your home garden, you are slaughtering the pig. The list goes on and on and on. You work almost every daylight hour you can, nearly every day of the year. And so we can maybe look fondly back on the tighter knit community, but these people did not have it easy.
Yeah, it is weird to reconcile the idea of peasant uprisings based on very real material needs and difficulties with actually everything is chill and awesome. And I mean, to the extent there's a bit of a fantastic element to Piero Camporesi's Bread of Dreams, but he's talking about a very real thing, which is people were starving a lot in Europe. Like, food scarcity was incredibly common. And yes, let's say they were having feasts. Who is cooking all that? Who's preparing? Like, again, you're raising these animals, you're slaughtering these animals, you're doing an enormous amount of work to actually get them ready to eat. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of labor. You got extremely high child mortality. This is not a great period of time. I do believe very strongly, I will say that, especially in a village, in a rural community, I do think the sense of community is orders of magnitude tighter than what we experience in our lives right now, in our physical surroundings. That's, of course, that's just kind of, I think that makes sense. Yeah. But the kind of kicking it back, every time I want to ask a person, did you just watch the Terry Jones overview of the medieval period? Because you're kind of saying all the things that he says in there, which are entertaining, but not necessarily great. But yeah, so again, I think this is nostalgic, but I'm going to agree with the experts here and say, community, yes. Easy living, no.
On the other hand, every day I was playing as Andreas and I'm just hanging out, vibing with the townsfolk.
He apparently gets to do whatever he wants. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for a wonderful discussion. I could talk like loads more about stuff in Pentiment. We had time to dig into the fact like that there are clearly queer people like in that story, and how are they making accommodations with the religious and also societal pressures that surround them. I mean, it's really well handled. In that story, and seeing how that plays out across like the course of a lifetime, which is one of the joys of that, is seeing a generation pass in this game. But yeah, I think we will have to leave it there. Dr. Kern, Dr. Black, Josh, thank you so much for being so generous with your time, and thanks for a lovely discussion.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And we're back. Rob, great job with that interview, buddy. Crushing it.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Can you add in Cado? Could you go find a thanks?
Oh, yeah.
Or something?
Sure.
And just
I'll go find a
Rob
Rob
in there?
thanks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. Thank you, Cado, for
No problem.
for doing that. Questions, you can send them in to gaming@vice.com with the subject line question. It's a new year, new mailbag. We won't get rid of the old ones, but they're writing some new ones. And we will...
New year, new mailbag, but we just transferred all of the things from the old mailbag.
Yeah.
Just dumped them
but,
into the new
you might
one.
get
Mailbag
like
is
anything
nice
else,
and new. Yeah.
You're going to get preferential treatment if you're at the top.
Yeah.
Scroll down. Psh, that's a problem. This one comes in from Justin. Hi, I'll just listen to your Elden Ring spoiler cast and enjoyed it very much.
Wow.
I was especially interested in the conversation towards the end about community. At first, I was nodding my parasocial head. That's very funny. Quote, it is cool that these games make community part of the game, end quote. But then I started to introspect about the 70 hours I spent with Elden Ring. It's fun to tell stories about how friends tell stories. And it's true, people tell those stories. I've told those stories. And the trust that From places in its players also gets me and many others to do more with less than we thought possible. But that narrative also obscures both the way I suspect most of players experience the game much of the time. It ignores the tremendous uncompensated or undercompensated labor that From Software relies on to make their games functional for the majority of players, mostly in the form of wikis. I made tremendous strides in the game on my own. I discovered caves and far-off lands and beat bosses that I didn't think I could. I also had a handful of fun conversations with friends. But in reality, I spent a ton of my time on my phone on ad-filled wikis. Fextra Life, Fandom, IGN, Polygon, PowerPix, Reddit. So many wikis. I don't know how many of these sites and wikis function from a paid labor perspective, but I suspect unpaid labor plays a major role. You'd be right. Maybe the folks in charge at From like to tell stories about people telling stories. But they must also know that most of the time it's players reading the fruits of uncompensated labor of a small subset of fans to make their games playable for most others. This is not just a From problem. I'm not even sure if we should characterize it as a problem, but I thought it might. I think it ought to be acknowledged while we heap praise on the trust the game places in its players. It's a wonderful thing From has created, but it simply wouldn't be what it is without the work fans put into making the game playable for others. Thanks, Justin. I thought it raised an interesting question, like about. Very much the thing that we celebrate, which is the trust that From Software and its games put in its players, while also acknowledging that for a lot of people, they would like to know where the thing is and how to do the thing. And you find that on wikis and walkthroughs and guides. And if you go and I did several pieces last year on Waypoint about both how the guides sort of community props up financially lots of websites, and also how those people tend to be some of the most exploited and underpaid, despite them being a lot of the financial foundation for a lot of game websites. But I hadn't really thought about that in the context that Justin puts it in, or so the framing that Justin puts it in of, Ren, do you think that From they must now, maybe weren't early on, thinking that, look, we are building a structure for a game that will be explained by other people explaining it in the surrounding community that builds up around the game after it's released?
I mean, I think that like the game is designed with that knowledge in mind. I think that the problem comes with the specific ways in which those communities are being exploited by other people, right? Like it is, I think that it is a solid piece of game design. And in fact, like, I think it is like in a vacuum is good. I think it is an outright good in a vacuum. However, I do think that like this person is right. The specific industry that exists around this sucks. And is bad for a lot of the people who are underpaid and working in it, right? And that's a bummer. And I don't think it's like it is one of those things where it's not like a thing you fix. I don't think it is a thing you can viably fix, because like even if you put all that information in front of players, right? The people on the wiki still have to put the information in. If you look at the wiki of virtually any game, all that shit is in there. Right? Like it's going to exist no matter what. There will always be a, website that is a receptacle of most information that, communities have on a game, because it will always be easier to go through a website than it is to remember a conversation that you had with a character 18 hours ago. And I think that this is like not a unique to FromSoft thing. I think it is just like the industry that has emerged from the nature of games as a medium, and the way that people engage with media currently is a bummer.
It is.
Yeah, oh, go ahead, Cado.
I was gonna say, like, specifically in the form of the wikis, like that is still community, right? Like that is why those places tend to exist, and just the fact that like they have to, they're using ad revenue to like keep the servers running, or like to make themselves money, is like a whole different kind of beast from the fact that like someone will probably record this information somewhere, right?
Yes, and also it is worth noting that a lot of the wiki websites have become businesses that hire people to do this work, where it is not just like, oh, you are, Dark Souls Eric, and you would like to post all about the Drake sword in the wiki. It's not Dark Souls Eric doing it anymore. It is someone who is hired to be Dark Souls Eric. At that point, it is a tool for the community and part of the community, but it is always mediated through a existing corporate architecture.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you saw this pretty clearly. I remember seeing formerly Fanbytes Imran Khan, who the news editor over there, tweeting there was a steep drop off at a certain point when just the broader gaming public had kind of moved on from Elden Ring in like the late spring, early summer period, where like Elden Ring became like its own industry. It was producing an enormous amount of traffic in terms of guides, news articles, features. People just wanted to consume anything they could about Elden Ring because that game just popped in a way that even from, couldn't have expected, and websites couldn't have expected. Like that's why people build that stuff around games like that in the hopes that it can be that sort of payoff. And so that is not, the ad market, the underpaid labor is not From Software's fault. I would be curious if for as big as Elden Ring was, surely there are millions of people, maybe tens of millions of people that played that game and didn't look up stuff like that. And that the audience that is writing into this podcast, reading about Elden Ring, is going to be the type of person that's also going to look at a wiki. If there's people out there, you must know them. Maybe they don't exist, but I have to assume they do. If you have complete normal people that played this game and just sort of played it and weren't constantly consulting things, or if they, as a result of playing it, and weren't the type of person that would consult those things, found themselves doing it. I'm just curious if anyone is listening to this has people in their lives that could kind of be that sort of representative kind of average person that maybe was new to the series and the format as a result of how popular it was, and were they naturally just drawn then to things like wikis? So please write in if you have any stories about that. I'd be curious to see where all that fell. Elsewhere, this is very good. This comes in from Brett. Hey, Womrads, which is admirable. I feel we're really scraping the bottom of the barrel when it comes to these intros. There's one I didn't
com points.
I don't know if we're going to read this. In the event that we never read the question, I do just want to read. Hold on, let me find it. The shout outs to Phil from DC in case we don't ever read this. Good afternoon, motherfuckers. I'm trying out some different. I'm trying out some different energy for 2023.
Damn right we are.
So Phil from DC, if I don't get back to your question, you made me laugh really hard this afternoon when I was looking through the questions. Hey, Womrads. Not sure if the words you didn't realize you didn't know how to pronounce bit is still going. It's probably over, but I felt this was a good one to conclude it on, is what I'll say. If it is, as a person who has goofed it on several words, here is my take on it. Fuck it. Live your life, double down, and really dig in your heels. I could not tell you when I realized that I didn't say pillow. I pronounce it pillow instead of pillow. Zine. Zine instead of zine.
Zine.
And contrao? Co-intro. Correctly. But by God, have I insisted on pronouncing them improperly, despite friends and peers correcting me incessantly. Not sure where the pillow comes from. Zine, because I didn't realize it was short for magazine. Contrao, likely because I learned about
COINTELPRO.
Yes, early on. What are these things?
COINTELPRO?
Yeah.
Oh, buddy.
Is
the
that
US
not a short
government's
answer?
done a lot of bad things. Yeah, that is the U.S. counterintelligence program.
Yeah.
I believe is the thing that killed a lot of radicals in the United
MK
States.
Ultra.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. All right. Because I just hadn't heard that specific acronym. Early on, I thought the words looked similar. Regardless of how it came to be, the only way forward in life after these sorts of gaffes is to steel yourself and push through, purposely butchering words until the day God himself strikes you down. Fuck capitalism. Eat, drink, and buy books, and then make up pronunciations as you go along. Cheers, Brett. Extremely good. Brett,
fuck it.
I salute you, but also feel bad for all of your friends who are constantly correcting.
This is me
But I
with
do
the
think
word niche. Niche.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's fine.
I vacillate. I vacillate, but my wife really fucking hates it. I don't like.
People
you know
what you mean. It's a weird word.
It's also completely legitimate to pronounce it based on the rules of English. There are other words that end that way that get pronounced that way. English is fucking made up anyways.
I know. You and Jessica agree. Reading this Star Wars book, like that pronunciation doesn't. That's not how. I'm learning words. That's not how that letter works. Yeah, you're right, Jessica. That's not how school works. But you are correct in the real world.
It was pointed out to me in one of our podcasts. I was completely oblivious to the fact that everyone else was saying Google Stadia. Well, I was saying Google Stadia the entire fucking time.
Yes,
just never never registered completely.
Wish I could own that. That went all. That's not that. Didn't be, like,
didn't even.
Normally that'd be like a bit, or we would point it out to you and like let it keep keeping a bit. That's just. Whoosh.
I'm committed now, though. I'll say Stadia all fucking day long. Not that
oh wow, very convenient for a thing that's shutting down.
I was about to say, not that I have many opportunities to.
Well, we'll stream on the day that it shuts down, and you can just say it all day that day.
Thank you.
Well, that is going to do it for Waypoint Radio. Again, if you want to write in questions, you can do so at gamingadvice.com with the subject line questions. I don't know how. Because of some recent developments in the sports world, the recent injury that occurred during the Bengals-Bills game, we'll see how Rob feels, but I can feel like a sports thing coming on sooner rather than later to address what happened there in the NFL. So if you've got any questions related to that, make sure you can send it to the same place, gamingadvice.com, and just put the topic sports. But that's a wrap on today's episode of Waypoint Radio. If you want more from Waypoint, you can follow us on Twitter at Waypoint, on Facebook and YouTube at Waypoint Vice. This podcast is brought to you ad-free if you're a subscriber at waypointplus.com. We had a number of podcasts go up over the holiday. We had a lengthy Game of the Year podcast that People seem to really like the format for. We did kind of round robin, game of the year, top 10 list. I can now confidently say, after it was pointed out by someone else, that I did steal that from the very podcast I mentioned at the top of this podcast, which was the Filmcast, that's how they do their game of the year or their movie of the year awards, is top 10 lists in which you wait to have the discussion till it's at the top of whoever had at the top of their list. So shout out to that really good film discussion podcast that I shamelessly stole that format from, because it's really good. It's a really good format. And they probably stole it from someone else, but that's where I heard it. So you can listen to that. Also our spoiler cast with Austin Walker talking about Elden Ring. We also released 2 early Waypoint Plus After Darks that myself, Rob, and Austin and Cado did when Waypoint Plus launched. Those were originally Waypoint Plus exclusives.
I wasn't there for either of those.
No, we did those by ourselves. Okay, all right,
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Cado, you edit them. You're there.
That's true.
The magic hand of
true.
Cado is present regardless of whether you're on the microphone.
I was on vacation, I think, when that
I
happened.
think that is true. Our theme music is Bowen. The track is Miss You off the EP Pale Machine. You can learn more at waypoint.zone/Bowen. You can follow me on Twitter at Patrick Klepek. Ren, where can people follow you?
At Ren or Raven.
Do you have anything going on your personal streaming? Are we on a break post Silent Hill?
I took an accidental, unplanned hiatus after COVID. So I got COVID and it threw my whole shit off. And I haven't been able to get back to it. And so ideally, I will return to Silent Hill 3 at some point in the near future.
Oh, cool.
Nice.
The one that's the mall one, right?
Yes.
All right. Cado, where can people follow you?
At @A_Cado_appears.
That's us calling time this week. We'll talk to you again next week. We will have a more normal schedule. Next week, we'll go back to streaming. I got some articles in the works. We'll have more things going on as we lean into January. Until then, fuck capitalism. Go home.